Ah, it did work this time. It started. All right, so I'll just pop up the slide real quick. We'll come back and talk about this. But so where do we start? So we're going to start with some simple management tools that the travel hacker could use to make their life easier. All right. So for example, maybe a credit card manager or a reward point manager. So, like I have 20,000 points with this. I have 30,000 points with this. So kind of a way of keeping track of some of your information. All right. But before we can do that, we have to kind of take our basic knowledge of Android and step it up one level. Okay. So I'm going to give you kind of a 45-minute Android crash course that should take your first level to the next level. Fair enough. I will go relatively quickly, so you might have to go back through and watch the video because like I said before, I will make the assumption that even if you don't have a lot of programming experience, as a grad student, you can learn fast. Right, Shadi?
Right.
Yeah, easy peasy. But I promise I won't give you an assignment that I can't solve myself. All right, so I'm going to start a new Android Studio project. Is that a good or bad thing?
You tell us.
Well, I don't know. I can solve a lot of problems.
There's been some stuff that I feel like you haven't solved before.
But do you feel like I couldn't have solved it?
That's what I'm saying. You could not. You didn't. You could not have. You were doing,
Oh, give me an example. There's no way.
But yeah, there was. I remember.
Oh, hold on. You were in that 450 class.
Yeah.
Yeah. The
450 class.
No, you weren't in that class.
Yes, I was. Listening.
That's how I met Ani.
So that was the distributed merge sort when I didn't give you. I couldn't have solved it with the tools that I told you needed to solve it with, the file I/O. Yeah, that would have sucked. Well, I probably could have solved it, but it would have sucked. That was not a fair assignment.
It took the entire day, the entire
Yeah,
lecture,
I remember.
and half of the other.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, you guys deserved that. Yeah, it was good.
No, you did.
I think I do. All right, so we're going to call this guy, I'm going to show you how to kind of show a list of stuff. All right, so we're going to create some objects and then load them into a list and have some stuff show up on the screen. So we're going to call this guy CSC518 list example. So you can use this to kind of base your program off of it. All right, and company domain, just leave it as whatever the default is. Store this wherever you want to store it. I'm going to end up putting it up in GitHub. So I'll show you how to check things into GitHub, and I'll also show you how to check it out, because what you'll want to do is, well, actually, for this first assignment, I'm going to want you to not start with mine as a starting point. I want you to kind of duplicate what I've done. Okay, that way you get to put the reps in. All right, so I'm going to hit next here. Just leave everything as the default. This thing here, the phone and tablet, should be checked. This whole API level thing here, just leave it as the default API 15. This is saying what widgets do you want to have available to you, and when you're writing your app, what devices will it run on? So if I choose API 15, which is Android from 6 years ago, it's saying this will run on 100% of devices that exist today. So 100% of devices today are running Android from 6 years ago or newer. That's what it's saying. So as long as you're not taking advantage of some crazy brand new widget that was just brought into existence with Oreo or Pi, the newest Android, you're going to be fine. And I promise you we're not going to be doing any earth-shattering interfaces in here. So leave it the default. API 15 is fine. Phone and tablet. Go ahead and hit next. I like to always start my projects as empty activity. So the most bare bones as you can. All right, and go ahead and we can let it name our original activity main activity, and then make sure this checkbox is checked for generate layout file. You can let the name stick for activity underscore main, and then keep the backwards compatibility thing set up here. Remember at the very beginning of class today, we talked about MVC, model view controller. Our controller is this main activity.java. Our view is activity main.xml. Okay, that's an example of MVC here. Remember, MVC says it's a good idea to keep your view, your interface, your code, and your data separate. All right, so this guy creates my project up here. I'll go into app, Java, click on this guy here. Oh, I'm ahead of Gradle. All right, Gradle finished. Gradle is the Android build system, so you need to wait for that to finish. Sometimes it'll say Gradle finished with errors, and do you want to try it again? You can hit sync and let it try to do it again. Otherwise, you can just close Android and relaunch it. And a lot of times it'll fix it. But after Gradle is finished, click on App, click on Java. This top one will be the one where your actual code is. These other ones are for like unit testing. And then we have a file here called main activity. So here's our main activity.java. Similarly, I mean, it already opened both of them, but also in this folder called res, that's resources, then layout, you'll have a file in here called activity main.xml. This is our interface. So if you look at the code inside of here, it looks like this. If you click to the design tab here, and let me minimize this, it shows you what your interface will look like. Okay. So if I do nothing and I hit play, this is going to give me my default Hello World app. Now, when you go in here, it's going to want you to use a built-in device. Here, let me go ahead and actually kill off my Android emulator, because I currently have it already running, just so you can see the whole launch process here. All right, so I'll hit play up here. This is going to say you either don't have a USB. If I had my Android device hooked in through USB, it would show up. I can run it on my device directly, or I can create a virtual device. By default, you won't have any of these guys down here. So you could choose to say create a new virtual device, and you should have done this in the tutorial thing, right? That you did this last week. All right. But I usually will choose phone, and I'll choose like the original Pixel. It tends to be a pretty good size device for most testing. Hit next there. It's going to show you the recommended images. You might not have any of these, but bottom line is you want an x86 image, and choose either the one that's already downloaded, because it just has to be newer than API whatever 14 or 15 that we chose, and this is API 27, so we're way newer than that. We're good. I happen to have Oreo already downloaded. If not, just download one of these guys. Doesn't matter which one, because we're using older stuff anyways. Hit next, it'll finish downloading it, and then ultimately hit finish, and you'll have that device. That's this guy right here, Pixel API 23. So I'll go ahead and hit OK. That's the device to play this on, so it'll launch this guy. And my app should show Hello World when it's done. Okay. Now, a couple of things you may have run into when you were going through the tutorials is there's a tool called Haxm, H-A-X-M, that you may or may not have had fail. I think that Jordan's failed on Haxm, right? So did you have to go and change the BIOS thing?
I went to the BIOS.
Yeah, so one issue that people can run into is and you had to do it on your laptop the other day. So, and it tells you when you do if you do a Google search for the error message you might get, it says that, hey, your machine's BIOS has something disabled. You need to go in there and enable it and then reinstall Haxm and it'll work. So Haxm is required now. In the early days of Android development, it was kind of preferred. What it is, it's in a, it creates a virtual interface between the Android device and your actual physical hardware. So the emulator here is actually running on your processor rather than in an emulated piece of software, and it makes it run a lot faster.
So it's like having VirtualBox kind of?
Exactly, yeah. It's goes through to your hardware. In the early days of Android development, if you didn't have, well, actually in the really early days, that didn't even exist, the through thing. So actually the emulator just took forever to launch, to the point where once it was launched, you just kept it open on your machine.
Doesn't it like use a section of your RAM? It partitions it out.
Yeah,
essentially?
yeah. It runs it as a virtual machine, like he was mentioning. VirtualBox actually uses your machine's hardware. But in the early days of Android development, literally the emulator might take 20 minutes to launch. Legitimately. And then once it finished launching, then it would you would just basically, the rule was don't close it. That's your emulator for now until your machine crashes. With Haxm, you notice it launches much quicker now. All right, so anymore, in fact, I don't think Android Studio will let you launch without Haxm. Up to a couple of versions ago, I think it would still do it, but it would just say this is a really bad idea. But now I don't know that I've seen a option with people who have had Haxum issues where it'll say, do you want to launch without it? So you have to get Haxum installed. What that pretty much says, though, is that if your machine has an AMD processor, you're probably out of luck. Because the AMD processor does not support the tool, because Haxum is an Intel-specific tool.
That's interesting. I installed Android Developer on my Linux box at home, and I have an AMD board in there, and it works. So maybe is there still software emulation?
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah. It's possible. It's possible that Haxum now does support it and is written in 2 different ways.
Okay.
Yeah, but definitely in the early days, we basically never could get it working on an AMD machine. Then you had some Intel machines that it wouldn't work on. You were like wondering why, like, well, we've only had problems on AMDs, and it turned out to be the BIOS thing. So maybe they've improved it now, and it's just reliant on that one setting, and it works on AMD or.
It's pretty slow, so I mean maybe it's optimized for Intel chips.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
You know.
Okay, yeah, I'm not sure, but it's Haxum is a pretty vital thing from a I'd like my life to be easier perspective. Okay, so here's our Hello World running app here. Now I'm going to show you kind of a quick and dirty way that I usually build interfaces. It's not going to be the fanciest interface in the world, but it's going to be good enough. Notice that the default thing here in our component tree says constraint layout. I don't like constraint layouts because I don't know how to use them. Okay, so I don't use them. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this Hello World label from here. And I'll leave the constraint layout in there, but I'm just going to pretend like it's dead to me. And I'm going to go to my layouts tab here. And I build everything using vertical and horizontal linear layouts. All right. So linear layouts says here's the bucket. If it's a vertical linear layout, anything I throw into that bucket will just stack on top of each other vertically. If it's a horizontal linear layout, anything I throw into that will stack next to it horizontally. All right. So I'll go ahead and just throw a vertical linear layout out here. Okay, and it'll just take up the entire screen inside of that constraint layout. And now, for example, if I throw a button in here, that button will be there at the top. If I then throw a text view in here, it's just stacking them on top of each other, so it's building it vertically. That make sense? All right, so both of these guys are children of my vertical linear layout. Now I can also then go ahead and throw a horizontal linear layout in here. And then I can throw a couple of buttons inside of that horizontal linear layout. And see, it stacks those guys next to each other. See how that works? All right, so you can pretty quickly build interfaces that won't make people puke. Okay, is kind of the punchline. Huh?
Oh my gosh.
Well, I mean, everybody's got to have a hobby.
That's not yours.
Yeah, that's why you have to have those. You need those cranberry pills. Or one of those bridesmaid sashes. One of those.
Are you still gonna be my maid of honor?
You said I couldn't.
Oh my gosh, no.
I have the sash now.
Sorry.
I also have 30 Hawaiian leis coming in the mail.
Did you really? Oh my god.
Oh, did you see that on there? That one?
Can we host a Grace event that's like Hawaii themed?
It's fine.
That'd be fun.
I'm down for whatever. All right, so we kind of see how we can build interfaces pretty quickly here. All right, so I'm going to simplify this. I'm going to go ahead and just dump my horizontal one so I have less stuff here. And what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to make this button do something. And we're going to make this text view have something written into it. So I'm going to click on this button. You're going to see over here on the right we have attributes. So instead of this button saying button, I'm going to change the text of this guy to say like press me, something like that. And then this edit text here, this guy has an ID. Right now it's called text view. And I'm going to call this guy answer TV. Okay, so I'm kind of giving this guy a variable name. I'm saying I want to call that text view answer TV, answer text view TV. All right, and the reason I'm doing that is I want to programmatically gain access to this particular text view. so that when somebody hits this button, I can change the text that's on this text view. That make sense? So right now, I'm going to make the text in the text view. It currently says text view. I'm going to make it say hello. Okay? Now, I want to go ahead and make that centered. Now, so anything we see on the screen in Android is something called a view. Okay? And if we think about this room as being a view, every view has gravity associated with it. So we can set the gravity in this room. For instance, if the gravity in this room was center in Android world, we would all get sucked to the middle of the room. Okay, we'd be halfway between the ceiling and the floor and halfway between all the walls. Okay, we'd all be just be in a pod in the center of the room. That makes sense? So we can set the gravity in a view, and then everything that lives within that view adheres to that. So I'm going to click on my text view here. Now right here, we're just looking at a very short version of the attributes that are available here. So I'm going to actually click on View All Attributes. With a text view, you can actually center text without using gravity, but I want to show you gravity because it works for every view. So I'm going to say View All Attributes. I'm going to scroll down to gravity right here. Hit the drop down. Now you can actually put the little star next to it, then it'll show up in that short list. And I'm going to go ahead and check. I can say center vertically, center horizontally. So center horizontally, we'll center it in there horizontally. Or I can just say center, and that'll center it horizontally and vertically. So you see how hello went to the middle there? Okay. If I scroll down to the bottom, I say view fewer attributes here. Notice that gravity is in here now because I set it as a favorite attribute. That's something I want to use pretty often. Okay, so it'll always be there now. We get the text size. If I want the text to be a little bit bigger, I'll set it to like a 24, and I'll make it bold so you can see it better now, right? Okay, so remember, this guy's ID is called Answer TV. So if I want to gain access to this particular text view in code, I need to go and find it in code. So I'm going to come in here to main activity. So again, this is an example of model view controller. This is my controller. This is my view. So I'm building my interface up here, or out here, and inside of my controller, I would like to interact with that text view. And in order to do that, I need to gain access to that, and we do that through Android's implementation of MVC. So for example, I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to say text view. We'll call this guy Answer TV. I'll just happen to name the variable the same thing as I named the one before. And this guy will be equal to the text view version of this dot find view by ID, r.id dot, what do I call it, Answer TV. All right, so that will get me access to that text view. And now if I want to change the text on that guy, I'll set the text to world. All right, so the default for this is going to say hello. Now, when my program first launches, the very first thing, so every screen we see in an Android application is an activity. That's what this guy is. So our Android applications are made up of a collection of activities. All right, now, when an activity is first born, this first function here gets called, this onCreate function. So when this guy is first born, before it actually shows up on the screen, what am I doing? Well, I'm setting the content view of this guy to activity main, which is this dude right here. So I'm letting that activity, that's where I'm marrying the activity to its layout. And then the very next thing I'm doing is saying, go ahead and grab me my text view and set its text to world. So when the first time we see this, we'll actually see world. It'll change from hello to world. Make sense? So I'll go ahead and hit play here. That device is already running, so I'm going to hit this little checkbox that says use same selection for future launches, so I don't have to keep hitting OK again.
How did you get gravity to be one of your
When you go down near where gravity is, just to the left, you can highlight, and it shows a little star there, and you can click the star. You just hover to the left of gravity, the word gravity. It works for any attribute. All right, so see how it says world now? All right, so it automatically got switched to world. Now what I really want to have happen is when I click this button, I want it to switch to world. So that means I need to write something in code that allows this button to do something. All right, so I'm going to go into my code here. So what we just saw in our first thing is how do I make something that I brought into existence on the interface, how do I make that available to me in code? Now we're going to look at how do I make something that I brought into existence in code available to my interface. So I'm going to write a function here that I want my button to work with. So I'm going to create a public void. I'm going to call this guy on button pressed. You can name it whatever you want. It's going to take a view as a parameter. And inside here, we'll go ahead and I'll grab this text view and set it to world. All right, so instead of grabbing it inside of onCreate, whenever we hit that button, we're going to go ahead and grab our text view and change it to world. All right, so now I've created something in code. Now I need to connect it up to my button in my interface. So I go back out here to my interface. I click on my button. Inside here, I have a thing called onClick here. If I hit the drop-down thing. Now, this function has to be public. It has to be void. It can be called whatever you want, but it must take a view as a parameter. What you name that view, it doesn't matter. You can call it elephant if you want, but it has to take a view as a parameter. It must be public void. So I'll click on this. I'll hit the drop down next to onClick. Notice that it has seen my on button pressed thing. So I'll click that guy. So now when I click this button, it'll call this function, which gets access to this label, this text view, and changes it to world. So I'll hit play here. So I clicked it, now it changed the world. Makes sense? And my layout's actually a little funny here. I want to set my width to, oh, that's interesting. So that's the full width. What's my constraint set to? Huh, interesting. Well, it doesn't matter. It can look ugly for right now. All right, so we have this button now doing something. Similarly, I'm going to put another button on here, and I want this button to take us to another screen. Okay, and I think that's kind of what the tutorial had you do, right? Did your tutorial do this? Have a button that made something change on the screen? Okay.
Essentially, whatever you type, you press the button, it takes it to another.
Okay. Well, we'll see some things that complement that. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and give myself another button on here. I'll do it better. All right, and we'll change the guy's text here to go to next page or whatever, something like that. All right, and we want this guy to call something on click, but it'll take me to a second screen. Okay, and we do that through something called an intent. But before I can do that, I have to go and create a second screen. So I'm going to go back up here inside the Java folder, inside of the top one that has my main activity.java in it. So I'll highlight this guy here, right click, say new, and I'm going to create a new activity here. Specifically, I want to create an empty activity. I will almost always create empty activities. All right, and we're going to call this guy page 2 for right now, for no other reason. Let's call it page 2 activity. All right, we'll go ahead and say generate layout file, so that'll create another XML file for us, but we will not select launcher activity, because you can only have one launcher activity, and that's the guy when you first start your app, that's the one that'll show up on the screen. So we don't want that to be this guy. Our original one is our launcher activity. Okay, all the other stuff you can leave alone, so we're going to use Java, and click finish. So this will create a second activity for us, as well as our activity page XML, this guy here. And I'll go ahead and I'm just going to throw a text view in here, and I'll just have it say page 2 for right now. I'm still doing a constraint layout for that just for right now. All right, so my goal is when I hit that second button, I want to come to this page. All right, so go back here to main activity. I'm going to create another function here for responding to the button click for that second button. This is going to be public void on next page button pressed. This guy will take a view v as a parameter. And what this guy is going to do is he's going to launch to that second page. And the way we launch to the second page is we first need to create the intent to launch to the second page. So we're going to create a intent. I'll call it I, and this guy's going to be a new intent. And intent takes two things. It takes the context we're currently in, which is this. That's my current activity. And then it also takes my destination, where I'm going. So I'm going to be going to page 2, activity.class. All right, that's where I will be going to. So I've created an intent, and then what I do is I use the current activity to start my next activity given this intent. So I'll say this dot start activity, and I'll pass it I. Okay? So now I go in, I'm going to set the on click for that button to call this function. So I go back to my interface for activity main. Here's that second button. I go to his on click. I choose the on next page button pressed function. So now when I run this, I hit go to next page, it takes me here to the next page. Okay. Notice that all Android applications have a built-in back button. So if I hit the back button here, it'll take me back to this page. Sound good? All right. So the idea here is that when we're on this page, maybe we want to be able to enter in some information. Make sense? All right. So for instance, perhaps I want to create an object that's going to hold on to, let's do something with like patient records at first to keep it relatively simple. All right, so I'm going to go into the Java folder here. I'm going to right click. We're going to create a new. Now in this case, I'm just going to create a normal Java class. Okay, I'm not making another activity. Activities are screens inside of our application. Instead, what I want to do is I want to create a Java object for holding information about students. Let's say students. Okay? So we're going to call this guy, so it's going to be a Java class. We're going to call it student. Okay? And then just hit OK. And it's going to create for me something that looks like this. Now, we're going to keep track of several pieces of information about a student. We're going to keep track of their first name, their last name, and let's say their age. 3 pieces of information right now. Okay, so we're going to have a string fname, a string lname, and an int age. Okay, so that's the kind of information we're going to keep track about students. Now, we should make all of these guys private. That way they're only accessible inside of this class, and then we will give ourselves methods for gaining access to them. We'll see how that works here in a second. Okay. So these are the 3 pieces of information we're going to hold about students. Now we're going to make our constructor. So we're going to have a public constructor. In Java, constructors have the exact same name as the class. So this is going to be student. And this guy, in order to create a student, we need 3 pieces of information. Its first name, its last name, and its age. So it's going to take in a string fname, a string lname, and an int age. And we'll say this dot fname is equal to fname. This dot lname is equal to lname. This dot age is equal to age. All right. Now, can anybody tell me what the this keyword is for? It's a pointer to what? So the this keyword is present inside of.
When the package is invoking the constructor.
Okay. Well, this keyword is available in C++, C#, Java. It is in JavaScript. In Python, it's called self instead of this. Same thing in Swift, it's called self. Objective-C, it's called self. Visual Basic, it's called me. All right? So the this keyword, this guy right here, this is how an object refers to itself from within itself. All right? So if I come out here to main activity, and I go into onCreate, and I want to go ahead and I want to create a student. So I would say something like student S is equal to new student, and this guy takes 3 parameters, first name, last name, age. So I'll say Mike Littman, and then we'll pass in, 15 is a good one. Okay, pass in 15. So now I have an instance of student here. Now out here I have a variable named S, correct? All right. But if I'm inside of the student class, I do not have access to that variable named S. The synonym for S is this. This is how an object refers to itself from within itself. And I can prove that to you here. If I go in here and I say system.out.println, and I say inside, and I'll go ahead and just print out this. And then I go to main activity, and I say system.out.println outside, and I print out S. So I'm printing out S outside of the student class. I'm printing out this inside of the student class. That make sense? So now when I run this, and we go and look at the way you can look at the log file on Android is through something called logcat. That's this guy down here. And I'm going to go ahead and inside, so I'm going to have it set at verbose here, and I'm just going to type in system.out here. And let me zoom that. Those two guys look like the same values. Okay, they're both memory addresses. They're the exact same memory address. Okay, so this in here has the exact same value as S does out here.
If you instantiate another instance of it, will you get another
We'll show you. So we'll call this guy S2. I'll leave it the same values, it won't make a difference. And then I'll go ahead and print out S2 here. The first time, when I first created in here, this will be the same thing as S. The second time, this will be the same thing as S2. So this is how a variable refers to itself, that particular instance of itself from within itself. So when I run it the first time here, it's going to first create S. Inside the constructor there, it's going to print out the memory address that's getting put into S. What's the next line? The next line is going to create S2. So it's going to print out the memory address that's getting put into S2. So the first two things it's going to print are two different memory addresses. Then I'm printing out the value of S and the value of S2. Also two different memory addresses. But line 1 and line 3 will match. Line 2 and line 4 will match because they're synonyms for each other. So if I get rid of that, I hit play, you'll see that the one and 3 match, 2 and 4 match. So the this keyword is how an object refers to itself within the class itself. Because we don't have that external variable like S or S2. It's not in scope. We can't access it from out there. All right, so leveraging that this keyword is a pretty important tool for all object-oriented programming.
Meaning, so like on the other one, and you refer to it as this, then it can go out
Well, here.
going on?
What I really want to say here is I want S.
Okay.
I want to print out the value of S here.
Right.
Notice it's in red.
Yep.
It says I haven't seen a variable named S, because S lives and dies. It's a local variable to this onCreate method.
So how does using this get outside? Does it refer to anything within the program?
Well, when I brought this guy into existence right here,
Yep.
for that particular instance of student, a special variable was created called this.
Okay, and so this will pull.
So
that variable.
inside of that instance of student, when I want to talk about myself, I say me. That make sense? So when I say me, that's the kind of the same thing as saying this. It's how I refer to myself from within myself.
Okay.
All right? So that's this keyword dealy thing here. All right, so we can create instances here of students. I'll go ahead and get rid of that for right now. All right, so I'm going to be able to create instances of students. Now I also want a student to be able to display themselves. So I'm going to say public void display. And we'll do a system.out.println. We'll go ahead and print out their first name, their last name, and then maybe parentheses age, something like that. So we'll say this.f name concatenated with a space, concatenated with this.l name, concatenated with a space, open parenthesis, concatenated with this.age, concatenated with closing parenthesis. Something like that. Okay, so that's that display method. I'll come back in here to main activity. I'm actually going to undelete those things I had here. And I'll say s.display. So I'll create this instance of student called S that has Mike Littman and 15. And then I'll ask that instance to go ahead and display itself. All right, and what does it mean for a student to display itself? It means for it to print out first name followed by a space, followed by last name, followed by a space, opening parenthesis, their age, closing parenthesis. And there is my object right there. Make sense? All right, so now I can create instances of our students here. Now I'm hard coding these things in, but what would be nice is maybe for my second screen to have some edit text that allow me to type in the first name, the last name, and the age. Me maybe hit a submit button, have those things be read in from those edit texts, create a new instance, and maybe first let's just have it display itself, proving that we read this stuff in. Okay? So we'll go here to our page 2. I'll minimize this so the screen's a little bit bigger. I'll take this text view out. I'll go ahead and throw my vertical linear layout in here. Yeah, see the guy's like he's like cut off in here somehow. Yeah, it's probably something stupid I'm doing. All right, so I'll go ahead and I'm going to need 3 input boxes, right? 3 edit texts, one for the first name, one for the last name, one for the age. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead, we're going to go to text here. Now the first 2 are going to be just plain text. These are people's names. All right, so I'll say, there's that plain text. And I'll put another plain text there. And then the last one is actually going to be a unsigned number. So that's just going to be a number for their age. Make sense? Now, all 3 of those are actually just edit text. They're the same animal. The only difference is if I click on this guy here and you go down to his keyboard type, wherever it is, yeah, input type, it says number. Where these guys, the input type is text person name, text person name. So these are just like convenience drag and drop things for which keyboard do you want me to associate with this edit text by default. They're all edit text. They're the same kinds of animals. So this guy's an edit text. This guy's an edit text. This guy's an edit text. Okay? I'm going to go ahead and give them better names than edit text 2, edit text 3. We're going to call one first name ET, last name ET, age ET. ET for edit text. All right, so we'll call this guy F name ET. We'll call this guy L name ET. We'll call this guy age ET. Okay, now I'm going to change the hint in here. Well, first of all, I'm going to take the text out of this guy, so there isn't a default text. I'll take the text out of this guy as well. But for an edit text, you have this thing called a hint. So we'll say first name in here. The hint for this one will be last name, so we're giving them a hint on what we want them to enter in there. And then this one, we'll say the hint is age, like that. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and I'll put a button in here, and the purpose of this button will be when you click it, it's going to read in the pieces of information about this particular student, create an instance of student, and tell that student to display themselves. Make sense? Now, I'm going to actually put my button here at the very top. And this is more just a design decision. When you click on one of these guys on a smart device, the keyboard's going to slide up. So you can make it work so that this thing is in a scroll view so you can get to different things and stuff like that. But we have a relatively few number of things here. I'm just going to put the button at the top. That way the button won't be halfway covered by the keyboard, possibly. Okay, this is in no way a professional interface design. This is kind of just a quick and dirty type thing. Okay, so we're going to put the text on this guy to create student. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and give myself programmatic access to these 3 edit texts over in my activity. So that's this guy here. Now I'm going to actually make them owned by the class, and then we'll fill them in inside of onCreate. So I'm going to create a private edit text, and we're going to call this guy fname.et, lname.et, and then age.et, like that. And then inside of onCreate, we'll actually give them their values. So we'll say this dot fname.et is equal to the edit text version of this dot find view by id r.id.fname.et. This dot lname.et is equal to the edit text version of this dot find view by id r.id.lname.et. And this dot age et is equal to the edit text version of this dot find view by id r.id.age et. So now I've given myself access to those 3 buttons, right? Or those 3 edit texts. And notice that's pretty much the identical thing I did over here. Except over here I was getting a text view. Okay, so we see that same pattern that happens and throughout Android. You have widgets on a screen, you need access to them in that code, create a variable of that type, use the instance of that activity, this dot, to find that view by its ID, and we named the ID out here something that we could find. fname.et, lname.et, age.et. Get it? Okay, so after you do this 5 or 6 times, it's going to be very repetitive, and this is not a big deal to do this type of thing, right? Okay. Now I'm going to need to write a function so that when I click that button, something happens. Well, we've already done that a few minutes ago for the change in the text box thing, but now we're going to do this inside of page 2 activity. So I'll create a public void on add student button pressed. And you can name it whatever you want. I'm just using it, giving it fairly descriptive function names that feel meaningful. And this guy's going to take a view as a parameter. All right, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and read in these 3 values. Now remember, for student, he's expecting a string, and an int. So for that last one, for that age, I need to make sure I convert that guy to an integer, because he's going to be coming in as a string. All right. So I'm going to be a little bit verbose here just so I can get my value. So I'm going to say string fname is equal to this dot fname et dot get text dot toString. Then I'm going to say string lname is equal to this dot lname et dot get text dot toString. Then I'm going to say int age is equal to, I'm going to start writing it this way. I'm going to say this dot age et dot get text dot toString, but that's going to give me a string. I need to squeeze the integer out of that string. And I do that with a tool called integer.parseInt, and I pass it the string that I want to juice, if you will. Okay, so integer.parseInt takes a string as a parameter, and presumably we're assuming this string will be a number. I'm only giving it a numeric keyboard, so it has to be a number in this case, but we're not doing any error checking, which maybe we probably should, but we'll just say we write perfect code. So the idea here is that we're presuming we're passing in an int. We'll juice the int out. We'll juice the int out of the string, and we will be left with an int right here. Make sense? Lastly, now I have my 3 pieces of information. I'll go ahead and create a student, passing it whatever the first name is, whatever the last name is, and whatever the age is. And then we'll go ahead and tell that student to display themselves, just proving that it worked. Okay? We'll go ahead and connect this function up to that button. So I'll come back out here to my page 2 design. Here's my button. Here's my onClick. There's my function. So now what will happen is when I click this button, it'll read in the first name I typed in here, the last name I typed in here, and the age that I typed in here, specifically converting that age into a number. Okay? It'll look like a number, but it's going to come in as a string. So if it's the string 15, it'll turn it into the int 15. Make sense? Okay. So now, then it's going to create an instance of student right here, and then I'm going to prove that worked by saying s.display. So I'll go ahead and hit play. And let me
So you can, like, I'm just thinking back to the this, just so I got that correct. The this, like, anytime you're in the same JavaScript, whatever, you have to refer to it as this. Like,
you actually don't have to use the keyword this. I'm going to say for right now, just do what I do.
Because that's what I was going to say, like, why couldn't you just leave it off? And everything the same?
You can leave it off as long as you don't have a more local variable that matches it.
Okay.
And the best example of that is here inside of student. Like if I would have said fname equals fname,
It's the same thing.
it's not the same thing. Variables resolve to their most local definition. The most local definition of fname is right here. So what I'm doing is I'm setting this guy equal to himself. What I really want to do is I want to set this version of fname equal to this version of fname.
You have p underscore fname, so you know that's my parameter.
Yeah,
And you
yeah.
can-
So you the older programmers that don't understand the this keyword, or they grew up in a different thing, what they'll do is they'll cheat. They'll cheat.
No, that's my paradigm, man.
They'll do this.
Code like this in my world.
So, but yeah, I mean, this is true. So before, and this actually came from people who were writing things in procedural languages before anyways.
Okay.
This thing didn't even exist. This would have been the creation of a struct back in the day.
This is just training wheels, man.
So in this case, we would have said p underscore fname. He's calling it, that's his parameter, right?
That would work just
Okay.
fine.
Actually, you probably have it in the other thing, right? P
Yeah.
underscore and this.
I would call the
Okay.
one up there in
Yeah.
GV,
Right.
global
But
variable,
yeah.
because the scope's global to the
Right.
class.
But the punchline is that now these guys have different names. This guy boils down to his most local definition. His most local definition is this guy up here. That's why we don't need
See,
this.
When I get into academia, I'm going to write a paper called This Considered Harmful.
Where fname, his most local definition is right here.
Okay.
Okay, but we're going to say that good programming practice would say that you should name your variable something meaningful. And if your input should be a first name and the value you're storing should be a first name, they shouldn't just artificially have different names. call it first name, call it F name, whatever, but they should be the same because that's what it means. It means the first name. So we differentiate them here by saying this dot F name. That is the F name owned by this particular instance of student. This guy right here.
Got it.
Equals the most local definition of F name, which is this dude right here.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I think so.
Okay. Now, and this is kind of what I was saying, since presumably the idea would be, and this is different in grad school typically, is you might have 10% of a class whose background is computer science. You have a lot of people who have kind of technical backgrounds but didn't necessarily come through a 4-year program in programming and learning all this stuff through 7 classes, right? So I'm going to kind of throw this stuff at you sideways. Some of the stuff is going to not necessarily click at first. So there's going to be a point where you're just going to do what I do.
Okay.
But we're going to rely on the fact that, you know, you are all studious, willing to put in the work, and it will make sense to you once you kind of like mess with it a couple times, say, well, why doesn't this work? And that does work. And all of a sudden, like, oh, or you'll pose the question, and I'll explain, and hopefully I know how it works. But punchline is that, you know, I'm not going to tell you every little detail while I'm spitting it out there because I want you to be productive sooner. I want you to ask.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you when you ask. But I'm going to purposely not go into crazy details about things that I maybe would have covered like in a second semester programming class.
Okay.
Not that it's not good. I can give all of you videos. So I have videos from all of my programming classes. If you want to go and just power through them and watch this stuff and put you to sleep good at night, I can do that. So you can get all the little nitty gritty stuff. But I think you'll end up learning it almost through osmosis just from trial and error.
Okay.
Yeah, so point is that I have enough respect for your intelligence that you'll figure it out. It just might seem weird at first.
Got it.
Until it's like, well, this just works because it works, and we'll figure out why later. So write down your questions as you kind of hit them, and if you get something to work, great. Write down, you say, look, I don't know why this works. It did. It worked, but I have no idea why. Okay? But definitely don't do the P underscore thing.
Man, I'm just going to code this way just to see what happens in my grade.
Nothing will happen to your grade. If it works, it works. My wife's a COBOL programmer.
Yeah, well, and
Yeah, so
PL SQL is the procedural language.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
And so, like, that's just how we're trained to
yeah,
code.
I get it.
That's
I get
because
it.
our namespace doesn't resolve like this, so you just have to.
Well,
like,
I mean, but here's the difference. So my research area is languages.
Yeah.
So I started programming when I was 9, before object-oriented languages were really a thing.
Yeah.
So back then I would have done a very similar thing, but now almost every language I'm coding in is an object-oriented language, so then it just becomes second nature when you do something every 5 minutes.
No, I understand.
Right.
We
Yeah.
had a consultant whose background was object-oriented programming, and so I'm like, this is how PL SQL, and it just
Yeah.
took his mind for a trip. He's
Yeah.
like, where do I instantiate stuff? And I'm like, you really kind of don't.
But the reality is once you, I think most procedural programmers view object-oriented programming as this major, major paradigm shift when it's not.
Actually,
The
watching
difference is Tupperware. The only thing object-oriented languages do is they give you this nice little container called a class that allows you to stuff all your wires in there. You put the lid on, you say, here's some holes I'm going to poke in the side of this thing, and now whenever you need to get at crap that's in here, use the holes.
No.
That's the difference.
Actually, watching you do this in Android Studio reminds me of Visual's Basic long ago. It's like, oh, it's kind of like Visual
Yeah,
Basic.
same kind of crap, except in Visual Basic. In order to get to the button, you double-clicked it, but then it almost trains you to name your button like button 1, button 2, so then all of a sudden you had a button 1 underscore on click. And then, you know, once you have 50 buttons on the screen, all of a sudden it's like, well, which button is this one? So that's why I like to get pretty detailed about naming crap and things like that. Okay. So right now my main activity doesn't really do much. I have the 2 buttons here. The first one I'm not gonna even click that button again. But the second one takes me to that second screen. What does the second screen do? The second screen shows me my little form for putting in a first name, last name, and age. When I click this button, I read those 3 values in, specifically juicing the int out of the age. Then I use those 3 values to instantiate a student. And then I prove that I got that student by saying s.display. Cool? All right. So we'll go ahead and hit play here. we'll see that that guy works. So we'll go to the next page. I'll put in Mike. I'm not spelling it very well here, but we'll just go with it. So I put in something that is, we'll call it 25% ballpark my name. We'll say create student. I go down here to logcat, and here is that guy right here. The butchered typing and all. Okay, so it read that stuff in. All right, so now the last part of what we want to do here might go like 5 minutes over, but I just want to make sure you have, unless you want to figure it out on your own. You're over. Okay. So let me give you enough.
Is this relevant to our homework?
It is. It's exactly related to your homework. And it's not, I'm literally going to, it might not even be 5 minutes. I'll just go pretty quick. Actually, you know what? Let me think about this for a second. Because I can spend more time on list view stuff next week anyways. All right, so what we want to do then, let me show you how you can check, how I'm going to check this into GitHub. So first of all, if you don't already have an account, go to github.com like this. All right, and if you're logged out of here, let me sign out. Big money, big money. Okay, you'll create an account, blah, 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 so then you'll have an account on GitHub. And then what you'll do, so you can create an account right here by clicking sign up. Otherwise, once you have your account, click sign in. You're into GitHub. GitHub is a place for you to store code repositories. Okay, so I'm actually going to upload my code so you have access to it as a resource for your homework assignment. Okay, so I'm going to go here in GitHub, and we're going to, in Android Studio. I'm going to click on this menu that says VCS, and one of the options here is import into version control. And one of the things here is share project on GitHub. So I'll click that. Now, the first time you do this, it's going to ask you for your GitHub username and password. I've done this a few times, so I did that a long time ago, okay? But it'll ask you for it. So now, this is when you're initially putting it into GitHub. So I'm going to go ahead, and it already has the name, so I'm creating a new repository. Just leave all this stuff alone. Click share. It's going to bring up this. It's going to show you all the things that you've added since you've never checked this in before. And it even goes ahead and puts an initial comment for the initial commit. So this is us just pushing the code the very first time. So I'm going to say OK.
Did you guys put your stuff on GitHub for the homework?
Yeah. Yep.
Did anyone get like a username error or an email error?
Yeah, so like sometimes if you go in there, you have to go into the GitHub, go into the system preferences, and if it says block any incoming email or whatever, uncheck that. And then also, if you have to set your email on Git, like when you don't.
Yeah, that's what I did. I actually did a commit through Android Studio, and then it said, oh, what do you, because you have two options. You can do universal Git, and you can do the repository Git, so I was trying to figure out. Anyways, I was just curious if that, like, I thought maybe because I was using the Linux build of the IDE, I was like, yeah, there could be something.
I ran into them on Jordan's computer for sure. And then mine was like, it was a check mark on the GitHub Studio.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
so here's the code for right now. I'll go ahead and paste this onto Slack so you have it. Next time I'm going to talk about forking a repository, but what I want you to do for your homework is to use mine as kind of a reference. But what you're going to do is you're going to have two separate screens, and I'll write this up in Blackboard so you have the details. I'll just tell it to you right now so you can hit the road in the dangerous weather. So right now our app has two screens, right? We have a button that takes us to screen 2, and that screen lets us put in student information. What we're going to have is we're going to have two separate buttons. We're going to have a button that takes us to a screen that lets us put in information about a credit card. The information we want to keep track about the credit card is, we don't need the credit card number. We're going to keep track of the name of the card, the start date for the card when we first got the card, what the minimum spend is for the card, and what the reward is for that card.
Do you also want one for like with the yearly balances that you have to pay?
We could do that. You could have like, what's the yearly fee?
Yearly fee.
Yeah. So 5 pieces of information. I'll put this in Blackboard. So, and if you want to elaborate a little bit, do it a little differently, that's fine. Okay, but you still have one screen that will allow you to create a new card, and when you hit submit, it'll read in that card, create an instance of a credit card, so you'll have to kind of model your credit card off of our student class, right? And then display it, just so you prove that you got it. And then there'll be a second screen that allows you to create was it the loyalty program that I wanted to do? A reward point manager. So you're going to have the various loyalty programs. So you'll be able to enter in a new loyalty program. So a loyalty program will have a name. So for instance, Chase Ultimate Rewards is a loyalty program. And then it'll have a balance. So more than likely you'll start off with a balance of 0, but maybe you're first putting your stuff into this thing and you already have 18,000 points in Chase Ultimate Rewards. So you'd have a loyalty point, a loyalty name, and a current balance put into there. And you'll create an instance of that guy. Okay, so you're going to have 2 different Java classes, one for credit card, one for loyalty program. The credit card will have several pieces of information. The loyalty card will have 2 or 3 pieces of information. I'll think through it a little bit tomorrow morning and make sure I have it. I assume none of you are going to work on this tonight when you get home. Okay, so punchline, there'll be 2 or 3 pieces of information. So you'll get practice writing 2 different objects. You get practice creating 3 different screens in Android Studio and generating instances of those objects from each. Make sense? Okay. I'll go ahead just so I don't forget. I'll put this in the assignment too, but I'm going to go ahead and paste on Slack the GitHub link that I just posted. So I don't want you to fork and check this thing out. I just want you to use that code as a reference as you're doing your homework to model it after it, because hopefully this is pretty similar. I'm doing something that's like this. Let's kind of connect the dots and see how it works and see where you screw up, because what we want you to do is put those reps in. Make sense? Questions, comments, concerns, bribes? All right, so next week we'll meet out in the hallway again, because rumor is that Dr. Lockler's class is actually in here, so we might need to find a different home, but we'll figure it out. Okay, so just meet in the hall again next week.
We're missing 2 tonight. I use my magical DBA skills to look.
Who were we missing?
So Karan, or
yeah, he's here.
He's here, and then so we're missing.
There's another Indian student.
The student from India.
You're right. We're actually not missing anybody.
Oh.
One of them is actually in this class, but enrolled in a different class.
Okay,
and then the other one that will I think they'll be here next week. I think they'll be here for next class. Their plane has not arrived from India yet.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, actually that's true. It's a gal.
Yeah.
And we don't have a picture of her in the database yet, so I thought maybe she's not on campus, because it's usually when they get their picture taken.
Yep.
I mean,